Good evening. Could I have your attention? Good evening. Hello. Good evening. Hello. Thank you all so very much for attending, whether you're here in person or you're live streaming. My name is Marilyn Mulvihill, and my co-chair, Donna Aiello, and I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Justice Ministry here at St. Brendan's. We would also like to welcome Evan Wolfson, and are so very grateful that he could join us this evening. As most of you probably know, Evan is widely considered the architect of the movement that led to the nationwide victory in 2015 for gay marriage. Before we get started, a couple housekeeping things. Please silence your phones if you haven't already. And if anyone live streaming has questions, please email them to questions@St, that's ST, Brendan's, no apostrophe.org. All right, let's get started. Evan, could you give us a little information about your background and what drove you to change the law on gay marriage?
Well, thank you for inviting me tonight. I'm sorry I can't be in Pittsburgh in person. I guess by way of background, I was born in New York, where I am now, but I grew up in Pittsburgh along with my sister, who's there tonight, and my two brothers, and of course our parents. And I went all the way through high school in Pittsburgh, and then went off to college and the Peace Corps and law school, and then moved to New York, where I am now, though come back very often to visit family and our neighborhood, et cetera, in Pittsburgh. So it's great to be speaking with Pittsburghers, even though I unfortunately can't be there until Thanksgiving. So I felt that there was an injustice, that gay people, including me, were being unfairly denied something very, very important. And I felt that it was important that we stand up and fight for it, both for its own sake and as an engine of transformation that would help non-gay people better understand who gay people are and connect to them with our values and our shared values and aspirations in a way that would help them rise to fairness and get our country to a better place. So we can talk about why marriage in particular, et cetera, but that's what led me to, as a law student, write my thesis on why we should fight for the freedom to marry, and then to vote the next 32 years, one way or another, to working to make that happen. Now, I wasn't the first person to think of the idea that gay people should be able to marry. I was in my paper in 1983, I was writing about the first wave of litigation brought by brave couples all across the country in the immediate aftermath of Stonewall. We usually talk about Stonewall, the riots that erupted right near where I'm sitting now in New York, against police brutality and harassment and shakedowns and organized crimes and unfair laws. We usually talk about those riots as the beginning of the modern gay rights, and now we often say lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender rights movement, which is, of course, now not just a national movement, but global. In the immediate aftermath of Stonewall, which we mark as a benchmark for the beginning of that movement, these couples went all across the country, challenged the discrimination, the exclusion from marriage, which was part of the whole edifice of discrimination that gay people faced back in those days. And they all lost. So when I came into the story about 10 years later, I was writing about how we shouldn't take that no for an answer, and how that by engaging the conversation around marriage and by fighting for marriage, we would be seizing an engine of transformation, a vocabulary of connected values that would help us to transform hearts and minds, and then the law. And a mere 32 years later, that's what happened. And this year, of course, we celebrate the 10th anniversary of that epic transformation.
Great. Thank you, Evan. Why do you think the Freedom to Marry campaign was so successful? What made it successful?
I think there are many reasons, historical as well as in the way we approached the work. I would say one of the elements of success was that we approached the work in what I think of as a campaign model. That is to say, we weren't just organized for the sake of organizing. We hadn't just randomly come together. We came together to pursue a strategy to a specific goal. And I would say the five key elements of successive activism, and there will be many versions of this taxonomy, depending on how you ask the questions. But 5 key elements of how you build and sustain momentum and achieve a change that many at the time think is impossible. Those 5 key elements are number one, a clear strategy that can compel people to action and help them to see a world that can be different. A clear and compelling strategy. So the goal, the strategy, which is really just the pathway. What do you need to do in order to get there? You want people to understand how change can be achieved, even if it seems big and far away. Third, you want leadership. You need to convey hope and determination and strategy, and you need to repeat that over and over. You need to inspire people. You need to bring people along. Fourth, you need a team. So it's not just about one person or one organization or one voice or one style or one methodology, be it litigation or legislation or public education or direct action or organizing. You're going to need a blend of many things, including a blend of people and allies and partners. And fifth, you need building blocks of success. You need to be able to show people progress along the way, even if the way is stony and hard. And so those 5 key elements, I think, are things we did pretty well and got right, not without many losses and defeats and stumbles and mistakes along the way. But all in all, historically speaking, we pulled together and sustained those 5 key elements. And those were, I think, the central to our success. Another factor that was beyond our control was some of the things that were happening in the world. And that's one of the lessons of history also. You can't control everything, but you can engage the opportunities that come even in the midst of hardship. So one of the key things that helped set the stage for our victory in winning marriage was AIDS and the cataclysm of death and disease that stalked us. Those of us who came into activism in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s or the 2000s, those couples that I talked about earlier who brought those first cases all lost. 20 years later, when we mounted the second wave of marriage litigation, most importantly in Hawaii in the 1990s, those cases launched an ongoing global movement. So why did one set of people fail and another set of people succeed ultimately? Well, in part, it was because of what came in between, which was this cataclysm of AIDS that shook the conscience of many people, that underscored the need to change things and to do things differently, that created new receptivity even amidst the discrimination and death. And we seized that opportunity, terrible as it was, to go through a dark time and emerge into the light.
Okay, great. Thank you. Given the current political state and the regime that is in power right now, how serious do you feel that the threat to gay marriage currently is?
There are, of course, threats, and I can understand why people would be worried and concerned. And look, anything can happen. History teaches us that terrible, terrible things can happen. So it's reasonable to be concerned and to worry. But what I think is not as reasonable is to sit around worrying. I don't think that helps. So while worry is understandable, don't just sit around worrying. There are reasons also to believe that they're not going to take away, quote unquote, the freedom to marry.
Good.
Some of those reasons are historically, we did not win the freedom to marry as a gift from the Supreme Court. We won after decades of organizing and battling and litigating and lobbying and fundraising and electing and conversing and persuading people. We changed hearts and minds. We built support. We won building blocks of success amidst many attacks and stumbles and defeats. And those decades of engagement and change were the engagement that set the stage for marriage. We created the climate in which the Supreme Court was encouraged and indeed impelled to do the right thing. Secondly, we now have more than 1 million people who've gotten legally married as part of same-sex couples. And for those 1 million, that represents tens of millions of friends and family members and kids and coworkers and neighbors and celebrants and people who came to their weddings, et cetera, who have seen with their own eyes families helped and no one hurt. And for that reason, we've been able to grow public support for the freedom to marry from 11%, which is where it was when I wrote that paper back in 1983 as a law student, to 63%, which is how we shifted understanding to set the stage for us to win in 2015. And that 63% has continued to grow as people have continued to see that none of the bad things that our opponents predicted happen, and that a lot of good things have happened. And we now have, according to polling this year, this was the 10th anniversary year, so there was a lot of studies and research and polling about what were the effects, how did it work out, what happened, et cetera. We now have majority support for the freedom to marry in every one of the 50 states, every single state, including states that up until the very last minute had been discriminating. So now, does that mean that the Supreme Court can't do something bad? No, but it creates huge momentum and encouragement for them not to. And while I do think there are at least 2 votes on the Supreme Court to try to reverse the marriage win, I don't think there are the 4 that are necessary to take it to bring the case to the court,
Right.
and I don't think there are 5 that are necessary to take it away. Although again, nobody can guarantee that. But there's more to the answer, which is that we didn't stop with our win. And that's one of the important lessons of history. Losses shouldn't stop you, but nor should wins. So we kept going. And in 2022, we passed through Congress a law called the Respect for Marriage Act. The Respect for Marriage Act, signed on the White House lawn by President Biden, overturned the so-called Defense of Marriage Act that had created federal discrimination in marriage. It repudiated that. And by the way, many of the senators and representatives who voted for the Respect for Marriage Act had decades earlier voted for the Defense of Marriage Act. So they, like America, changed their mind. They came to a different place and a different understanding. But the significance of the Respect for Marriage Act is that it provides that even if the Supreme Court were to take away the freedom to marry nationwide, which means that there is no longer, in that scenario, a guarantee that every state must allow people to marry. Even if they were to do that, the Respect for Marriage Act says that any couple that's legally married anywhere, in any state, must be respected as married in all 50 states and by the federal government. So even in the worst case scenario where they take it away, which I don't believe is going to happen, even were that to happen, we would still be at like a 90 to 90% level of protection, so that couples who lived in a discriminating state, let's just arbitrarily say Alabama, could still go to, let's just say, Georgia, get married, come back home, and they would be legally married, respected as married, and treated as married as they are by the federal government as well as all 50 states. So the people should not be sitting around worrying about the worst case of everything, but instead should look at where we are. And as you rightly framed your question, we're in a difficult time in our country with a dangerous regime in power. There's enough bad happening right now that you don't have to sit around trying to catalog all the other bad things that might happen. Just get to work. And if we get to work, we will protect ourselves against other bad things that happen, while at the same time getting our country back on track.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you. That's very encouraging to hear. Another little housekeeping thing. If anybody here in the room has a question, just come over here and sit next to me and you can ask that question. So just wanted to give you that bit of information. So as I said, all of what you've just said is very encouraging. But my question to you would be, what kinds of things can we be doing right now to advance equality in this country? Again, given the climate that we're in.
Yeah. So one answer to that question is just do something. Don't do nothing. Everybody should do something. Different people like and are strong at and qualified for and accustomed to all kinds of different things. Some of us are joiners. Join an organization, find a cause you believe in, find a community you want to protect and serve, and help them. Even at the smallest, most immediate level, taking part in joining a soup kitchen and helping serve needy people, standing up for immigrants who are under assault, standing up for women who need protection and support in their exercise of their reproductive freedom. Go online and donate. Find a cause you support and look on the website of the organization that you identify and look for the action steps they're asking for, whether it be write a letter, have a conversation, donate, protest, organize, register to vote, etc. So there are all kinds of things that, you joiner or not joiner, national, local, I care about this, I care about that, I care about that everyone can do. And all of that helps. All of that is valuable, and it helps in several ways. First of all, it helps immediately in the sense that you're supporting a particular cause or a particular community or a particular needy individual or so on. But it also helps you because doing something makes you feel more like doing something. It makes you feel like you're not just curled up in a ball. It makes you less isolated. It makes you part of something. And that also not only helps empower you, it helps empower others because you're setting an example and you're creating momentum. Now, having said all of that, the most important thing we need to do is reclaim political power. So while not everybody is as focused on that as maybe I would be or I would encourage them to be, and that's fine because do something, do what you do, etc. But if you can get so motivated, engage in political action. Now, that doesn't have to be confrontational and scary. It can, again, mean going on a website, finding one of the many organizations that do things, supporting them, helping them, looking at their action steps. It can mean learning what's going on in a purple state, or for that matter, in a purple district, even in a purple state like Pennsylvania. In Pittsburgh, things are pretty good politically, relatively speaking. Not that far out of Pittsburgh, there's plenty of room for people to be making a difference in the local politics, getting candidates up and running and taking back congressional districts, also taking up local positions, the state legislature, et cetera. So people really should consider how can they get involved in the urgent work of reclaiming political power, because only until we do then will we be in a much safer place than we are now. But again, all the other work that I mentioned can contribute to an environment where that happens. The one other thing I'll just mention is don't underestimate the value of speaking up. Speaking to the people you know, speaking to people in your circles. And again, that doesn't mean you have to go find the most obstinate, most awful friend you have and argue with them. It doesn't mean you have to fight at Thanksgiving. Not that that's off the table, but what it does mean is each one of us has a circle of friends, acquaintances, roommates, former colleagues, etc. We know people through the internet, at least through Facebook or whatever, who live in other states and so on. It is important that people hear from you. The chief engine of change is conversation. And even where you can't fully have the back and forth of conversation, though that is really important to do, you can at least call out abuses, speak out against things you don't like, and also point to things that empower people, ways they can make a difference, what you're doing to make a difference, why something that's wrong needs to be changed, and here's a website, here's an opportunity. Talk about a conversation you had with so-and-so who changed their mind, et cetera. All of that cumulatively is what creates the environment in which people are empowered to take action.
Thank you. Yeah, I have really found that the more you speak out and the more you are vocal about things, the more empowered you feel to do it.
That's right.
The more you do it, it becomes easier and easier.
That's
so
right.
Along those lines, I am a big proponent, as my friends here all know, of speaking out on social media. I'm on social media all the time talking about justice issues. What's your opinion of using social media to affect change?
Social media is a tool, just like the telephone, was a tool, just like the mimeograph machine was a tool. And of course, it's one of the main ways in which we communicate with a lot of people, and it's one of the main ways in which some people get their information and their engagement. So I don't condemn the, engagement through social media, but I would say it's not a substitute for personal conversation, for personal action, for offline involvement. Offline involvement has its own effects, and those in some cases are more powerful, turning up at a protest, joining a group, writing letters, et cetera, et cetera. But it also is a little more empowering. Social media can be isolating, both for the recipient and for those of us when we're on our phones or when we're on our screens, et cetera. Whereas joining with people, the old-fashioned way, actually has its own power and its own engagement. So even though a lot of us are no longer as used to doing that, and even though there are many people who don't receive their information or social life through that, which is why we can't write off social media. We have to reach people where they are through the means that reach them. But I would say it's healthy to try to do both, not just to do one. And
That's,
and of social media, the least effective thing is just sort of liking or not liking something that you're clicking on.
yeah,
It's much more important to add your voice, to
right.
to forward something to other people, to share something, etc. And when you do that, you also want to make sure that what you're forwarding, sharing, responding to is accurate.
Yes,
So check things. Don't trust everything you
right.
see on a screen
Absolutely.
because unfortunately there's a lot of disinformation, a lot of media manipulation that has now made it harder for people to really converse in a way that will actually affect change. So you want to be a responsible participant in that conversation, which, as I said, is the chief engine of change.
Yeah, absolutely. Evan, we have someone here that has a question from the audience.
Great.
Hi, I just wanted to see what I look like.
Thank you.
No, I have two. I'll say them both and then you answer what you want.
Okay, I'll try. I'll have to remember both, but go ahead. I'll try.
One is, I wondered what has happened in your life since 2015, what has changed? But like, that's just one. The other one is, I have a son who's gay and married to his husband. And he is, he spends all the time at home. He's the house husband and listens to a lot of podcasts. Within the house, he's very, very angry. He shows all the energy of an activist, but he does not get out and get involved. And I think fear is part of it. For somebody in the late 20s, what organization is there for support, even if it's just done digitally, to let them know, that it's safe to get out and speak?
Well, I would say on start with your son, to start with the last one, people, not just your son, but all of us, should be informed. We should not just tune out. Now, it's okay to tune out on a day or once in a while, or just to have a break, or catch your breath, or curl up in a ball for a day. But you should not just disconnect. You should stay informed. You should know the enemy. You should know what's happening, but don't wallow. Once you've got the information, don't listen to it over and over and over. We, in my household, my husband and I, we have massively cut back on, for example, our cable news watching. Not because cable news is bad, but because to watch it over and over and over and just get angrier and angrier and more depressed and more miserable, and to hear commentator A, who I like, denounce the thing, and then commentator B, who I like, denounce the same thing, and then commentator C, I like, that only emotionally roils you and doesn't actually help you to be empowered to make a change. So my general advice to people is be informed, but don't wallow. Eventually turn it off and start doing something else. Now, we already talked about digital versus non-digital and online, et cetera. In terms of your son, I would say I would begin for him with, what does he care most about? Okay, so he's walking around the apartment angry. What's he most angry about? The troops in the street, the treatment of immigrants, the rolling back of Roe v. Wade, the corrosion of the rule of law, the failure of his own generation to turn out and vote in requisite numbers, whatever it is, what's something that most upsets him, then go find an organization that's working on that specifically. There are, for almost everything, there are many. That's one of the great things we have going for us in the United States in this fight against authoritarianism. We still have civil society. We still have organizations. We still have groups like you who have gathered in this room tonight. We have that. Other countries don't, but we do. So go find one of them. Find, what does the immigration group ask you to do? What does the, again, pick your thing, the women's group, et cetera, et cetera. And if he wants to skew it, or if you want to gently help him skew it toward his generation, go online and look for, youth organizations that are doing X or Y or Z. There are groups that are more intent on mobilizing young people. There's, for example, groups like Indivisible or Stand Up America, or blanking on the name now. It'll come to me. But again, you can find those organizations. So start with that. Start with something he's most comfortable with, most interested in, most passionate about, most angry at, et cetera, and find something to do. Now, again, as I said, it would be better to go meet one of those groups, go join an event, join a letter writing thing, or go with them on a lobbying day to talk to your state legislature. Don't just be angry at what those idiots in Washington are doing. Go yell at those idiots in Washington, or in Harrisburg, or downtown. Whatever your passion is, engage in that. And all of that, as Marilyn said, will also then get him more comfortable, more empowered, and maybe he'll do it again. Maybe he'll be ready to do it. He also may meet somebody he likes that he can do it as a partner with, and et cetera. So that's how political change happens. And I know that you can look at anything and say, but that's just a drop in the bucket, or this is just one thing, or I'm just one person, or that's only one of the many things I care about. And all of that's true. But no one of us is going to solve this. No one thing is going to solve this. No one thing got us into it. It's cumulative, collective action that makes a difference. But, you invited me here because the campaign I led to win the freedom to marry, I told you, we started at 11%. When I started, there was nowhere in the world where same-sex couples could marry. Now it's almost 40 countries. It's over 1 billion people who live in a freedom to marry country. Things can change. We can change things, but it doesn't happen in one step or overnight or in one action and so on. But it does start with something. Don't do nothing.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I can answer your other question too if you want, but that's less interesting, I think. The other question is, what have I been doing since 2015? But why don't we hear what other questions people have, and we can always come back to that.
Well, one of the things people wanted to know about was what is happening globally, and what are you doing globally? You said there's 40 countries where marriage equality is legal now. There's also places like Uganda where you can be killed. So how does that stand globally?
Yeah. So one of the main things I have been doing since we won the freedom to marry and wound down that campaign is working with some of my former staff and team globally. And so we go around the world under the banner of Freedom to Marry Global. There is no actual organization. We're just a team of people who work together. And we coach, we advise, we assist activists on the ground in 30 to 40 countries now who are working to win the freedom to marry, non-discrimination, decriminalization, women's rights, human rights, in many countries also strengthening civil society and democracy. But we're not in charge. We're not, I'm not running those campaigns. We're coaching, we're advising, we're assisting. And to the point of your question, how we're doing around the world is literally all over the map. There are countries where we've made tremendous progress and where we continue to see progress. And there are other countries that unfortunately are being dragged backwards, often by forces, at least in part, exported from here in the United States. The evangelicals, not to blame every evangelical, but the Catholic hierarchy, not to blame the entire Catholic hierarchy. Many of the right-wing groups we beat here on the question of the freedom to marry have taken their export of hate abroad. And they are literally bringing a playbook of hate, colluding with, either intentionally or inadvertently, sometimes intentionally, forces like Putin and other disruptive authoritarian regimes that aim to destabilize democracy and progressive countries and pluralism in the world, often under the banner of religion. And so we are working to combat that and to help people move forward. And in some places, it's going forward, and in some places, it's still quite bad as it is here, and even worse than it is here. Now, I will say I just, in the last 2 months, was in Ghana, I was in Togo, I was in Nigeria, 3 different African countries, one of which, Ghana, has one of these anti-gay laws, like you mentioned in Uganda, pending and hanging over the heads of activists, and one of which, Nigeria, passed that kind of oppressive, sweeping, discriminatory, often deadly anti-gay law in 2014. And I went to Nigeria in part to see how is that playing out and what is the movement doing there. And in part because I wanted to take some of the successes they've had in Nigeria and help bring them to the activists who are confronting this threat and this circumstance in Ghana. And what was interesting, among other things in the trip, was though the law is terrible and the regime it initiated has stoked hatred and division and fear in Nigeria, it also contributed to a much more robust movement. And people have come together in a more structured and organizing way. And despite the fear, they are fighting. They're not just rolling over. And it has actually led to even more organizing, such that we're trying to replicate some of what's happening in Nigeria now in Ghana, and to help them take the lessons of success from that very dark chapter.
Well, that's encouraging. We have another questioner here with us tonight. Regis is here and he has a question for you.
Yes, and it's nice to hear you speaking about this tonight. I just wonder if you have any advice to clergy or to priests around are talking about this or preaching about this or getting involved. It just seems like, to me, just observing, it just seems like we have a lot more that we could be offering that we're not. And for some of the things that are going on. And I just wondered if you had any advice or any suggestions. And also maybe even for people to encourage clergy, in terms of what might be something that could be very helpful for us today.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. I appreciate it. And of course, I don't purport to be an expert in priestly duties, but obviously, priests, clergy, ministers, rabbis occupy a place of tremendous influence and importance in our society and mean a lot to a lot of people, and are often on the wrong side and often contributing to really terrible things that they may themselves not 100% support, but they either trim and duck, or they make compromises because there's something they like in what they're seeing that blinds them to the truly dreadful consequences that ultimately will far outweigh the particular gain that they may think they're somehow contributing to. So clergy who want to be on the other side of that, who actually want to bring things in the right direction and help people rise to, as Lincoln said, the better angels of their nature, have a tremendous pulpit and a tremendous reach and a tremendous, I think, obligation to do something really important. And what I think is the key to what they can do is to not just use the pulpit in a general way, but to really get people to engage with their own values and to help them see why their values repudiate the kind of ugliness and toxicity and consequences, even of supporting short-term political things they may agree with. So that even if you're, a low tax person, you may think low taxes is the fair way, it's the best thing, but the consequences of supporting some of the proponents of ostensibly lower taxes go far beyond taxes. And I'm just using that as an abstract example. Probably even a sharper example is there are many clergy and many faiths that are, somewhat anti-gay and that don't support inclusion of gay people. And in my view, of course, they're entitled to that. They're entitled to believe what they believe and preach what they preach. But what they really should be asking themselves is, does my position on that one thing outweigh all the other dreadful things that are being done by those who are exploiting that one question or even sincerely embracing that one question? Is that more important? And I think to me, the answer to that is obvious. No matter what any of us think, look at what's happening to our entire society. Look at the degrading quality of discourse and civility and engagement and coexistence and all the values of love and community and judge not that you not be judged and the golden rule and charity and kindness, etc. And I think clergy, of course, have a singular ability to talk to those values and to help people rethink what they're doing in the name of one thing they may feel or one position they may care about or one grievance they may have. I think clergy have a real obligation to encourage people, as I'm doing in a secular way, to find their voice, find their power, and make the world better, heal the world.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
And by the way, thanks to the right wing and the manipulative just mendacious quality of this current administration, the IRS has waved away the law and basically said churches can do whatever they want. So, okay, so if churches can do whatever they want, why do they only have to be heard on the bad side?
That's right. Good point. Yeah. I have a question from a friend in California who wants to know, is the state-by-state strategy where individual states codify marriage equality the best approach, or should the approach be focused on fighting against the overturning of the federal law? And where do we spend our money?
Right. So that question relates to the question you asked me earlier. And what I think the questioner is referring to is there have been some states that in the last few years have moved to remove the discriminatory laws and even discriminatory constitutional measures that had been put in during the anti-marriage wave of the 20 years or so before we won, to remove all of that from their law books and from their constitutions, and instead put in language in the constitutions that guarantee that in X state, California, Hawaii, Colorado, Nevada, there may even be one other, in this state, the Constitution guarantees, our state constitution guarantees the freedom to marry for all without discrimination. It guarantees that there not be sex discrimination, that there be equal protection, et cetera, et cetera. So some states have been moving to do that. And those campaigns, of course, cost money and they take effort and you have to go to the polls. And even though we have majority support now in most states, you have to be ready for just scary ads and opposition and voter distraction and so on. So there's a cost to putting them on the ballot, but obviously if they pass, they put in place a good law. And so now I told you about the Federal Respect for Marriage Act that we put in as a stop guard, as a safeguard, et cetera. Even if the Supreme Court were to overturn the marriage decision, and even if Alabama, for example, just always to pick on Alabama, were to start discriminating, it's guaranteed that Colorado will affirm marriage. So, quote, all that someone would have to do at a minimum would be to get themselves from Alabama to Colorado or California or Nevada or New York or New Jersey or Maryland or one of the many, many other states that will not discriminate and get married, and then they would be able to come home. So one strategy, which your friend is asking about, is should we be investing in getting more states to enact those measures that would be safeguards against discrimination?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And or he's asking, should we put our resources into defending against the Supreme Court's overturning the law in the first place? So my general answer to that is, while it's a good thing for states to remove bad language from their law books and from their state constitutions, it comes at a price. That's the work that it takes money to run a campaign. It takes money to turn out the vote. It takes money. And that's money that could otherwise be spent on other political races and other work. And so I would say, as a general matter, because I don't think the threat to the freedom to marry is the most urgent threat confronting us right now, if people have to choose, I would prefer to see people choose to put their money not into something that is narrowly focused on marriage or even necessarily on gay, but on restoring political power to those who actually support democracy and the rule of law and who are going to act change. The single most important thing we need to do is reclaim political power. So, you know, if you have a lot of resources or if you want to spread it around some, it's reasonable to support multiple things. We all care about many things. But the most important thing is reclaiming political power. So voter registration, reaching young people, reaching people who were disaffected or misinformed in the last election or are getting all their news from some crappy website. The most important thing you can do is support efforts to turn that around.
Okay, great, wonderful. I'm going to get a little personal right now. You received the Presidential Citizens Medal from President O'Biden. President O'Biden. No, that was good.
Yeah.
President Biden.
Yes.
And just wondered how how was that for you? What was that experience like? That's got to be a seminal thing that happens in somebody's life. So just tell us a little bit about that, if you would.
Yes, obviously it was a great honor, and what made it especially moving for me was not just receiving the medal, but that so many of my family members, and I was only allowed so many tickets, but so many of my family members and a few friends were able to come. And the fact that so many of my family in particular wanted to be there, my sister and sister-in-law who are in the audience with you tonight, my brother and sister-in-law, my niece, my nephews, et cetera, that they all wanted to be there and that they were there, and my husband, of course. And we took this great family photo with the president and first lady in the blue room, and it's this long string of Wolfsons and others with the president.
Wonderful.
That made it very, very satisfying and exciting, and it also meant a lot, not just to obviously be honored at the White House, which, you know, it's not bad, but I was honored with other activists, particularly one of the other lead activists whom I've worked with for decades, who also won the medal. And we were honored alongside other Americans who have done other important work. And to go from a cause that most people thought was crazy and would never happen, and it was absurd, and, you know, there are other terrible things happening. How can you waste time on this? And to go from that to being celebrated as having made America better, which I believe we did, and having made lives better, which I believe we did, and to be the proof that change can happen, that's very gratifying. That's the real medal. That's the real pleasure.
Yeah, well, congratulations. Very well deserved. We have a question online here this evening. Are you a person of faith? And if so, how did your faith motivate you and guide you as how you work toward this goal? If not, what role do you see religion playing in full equality for everyone?
Yeah, I would not describe myself as a person of faith, although I'm culturally identified as, you know, Jewish and very, very much celebrate the holidays and part of the community. And I take pride and pleasure in the community as well as annoyance. And I feel like I know a lot about religion, not just my own, but others. And I am aware of the importance it plays for many, many people and its power for good and for bad. And I am interested in it. When I travel, I will, you know, go visit churches or go visit mosques or go visit synagogues, et cetera. So I'm not myself motivated by faith, but I'm interested in it and understand its power and its importance. And I would say I am motivated by values. And I think that many people, including many people of faith, will describe themselves as being motivated by religion or by faith, but really what's motivating them is values. And I think for that reason, you can often have situations, as for example, we had in this country and still have, where, for example, the Catholic hierarchy was fairly opposed and one of our chief organized opponents in many decades of our fight. And yet Catholics were one of the best, most supportive cohorts in the population. We had 63% support amongst Catholics, even though the hierarchy was against us. And I think that's in part because Catholics have had a lot of practice in caring about their faith, taking some forms of observance quite seriously, respecting the voice of the church, but also disagreeing and knowing when to work around whatever the bishop is saying or whatever this, if they're motivated to do so by their deeper underlying values of love, compassion, charity, caring for others, respect, family, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I actually think that's true of most people, whether they describe it as faith and religion or whether they describe it as their values. That's where we can really connect with people. And so I am a person of values, and I respect that and its power. So there's all of that. And then I would say in answer to the second half of the question, because many people do identify as people of faith, I think it is important to engage them, again, not in doctrinal arguments and not over who's right, who's wrong as a matter of what this biblical passage says or doesn't say or whatever, though I think I may know that better than some people who declare themselves people of faith. But I actually don't think that's what moves people ultimately. I think that's more often the excuse than the reason. And so what I do find is that communities of faith and the vocabulary of faith, and as the questioner Regis earlier asked, the voices of not just leaders of faith leaders, but people of faith speaking out can often move people and help them find a pathway to rising to their own values and to the meaning of the faith, even if not the instructions of the current hierarchy. And so for all those reasons, I think religion is interesting and important, whether or not I myself am primarily motivated by it.
Okay, great. Evan, I have to say that coming here tonight, I was just a tad discouraged by what is happening in the political realm.
Just a tad?
Well, I'm optimistic. Yeah, I was more than a tad discouraged. Letitia James being indicted and different things that happened today that just seem like each day it gets worse. But what you have said tonight brings me a lot of hope and a lot of optimism. So I'm just curious to know, are you optimistic for what is happening in this country? Or do you think, or are you a tad discouraged?
I prefer the word hopeful to optimistic. I mean, I'm not looking at everything and saying, "Oh, it's all great, it's all going to be fine."
Okay.
I don't think that. But I am hopeful. I believe it can be better. I believe we can fix it. I believe we can repair and reinvigorate and rebuild, but only if we go to work. And the chief first step toward change is to believe you can achieve change. And the first step toward changing others and helping others rise to their own power and responsibility is by helping them believe it will make a difference and that we can do it. So I am a firm believer, authentically and sincerely, in hope, even when things are clearly dark and discouraging. But the opposite of discouraging is encouraging. It's courage. You have to engage. You have to go out and make the world better. And I have no limitation on my commitment to that. I believe fully in that, even as I look at terrible things. I also think, to the point of the way you asked the question, we have to understand that it's going to get worse before it gets better. So it is going to be bad and it is going to get worse. But you can either sit around worrying and wallowing in the bad, or you can look for the pathway out of the bad and start moving down it and encourage others to move with you, which is the key to getting there. And I absolutely, without any doubt, believe we can do that. We have to do it. I believe we can do it, but it begins with hope. It does begin with encouraging people to not wallow in despair or cynicism or false equivalence or one-sidedness or repetition of badness. It just requires finding the pathway, and you're bringing your step toward it, and then taking the next step and encouraging others to do it. And that's how we will achieve change. But there have been terrible other times in our own country's history as well as in others, and people have gotten through it. Having said that, getting through it is no picnic. And there are many, many people who are suffering far greater than I am. I can look at what's happening and be unhappy and beaten down by how bad it is some days, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm okay, personally okay. There
Right.
are others who aren't okay. There are others who've been sent to gulags in other countries. There are others who've been forced to bear children they don't want to bear. There are others who've died because they've been denied health care and et cetera, et cetera. So it's no light thing to say it's going to get worse before it gets better. But it's also not helpful to just wallow in that and give up because that's going to happen. You have to understand it, and then you have to push on through it. And that's how we're going to get our country to a better place. And we are going to do that.
One of the things that you said tonight that really made a big impact on me is that the chief agent of change is conversation. So when I do any of these kinds of events, I always say to people at the end, we've learned a lot tonight, and it's wonderful to know all of these things. But what matters is what you do with what you know. That's the thing that matters. So I really encourage every person here tonight to have a conversation, to do something, to try to bring about that positive change that we need to see. And when I get really down in the dumps, I always go to my favorite quote. My favorite quote is one of Martin Luther King Jr., and it's also Barack Obama's favorite quote. And it is, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." Let's all bend the arc.
That's right. And I actually think the way you ended it is the most important part. I agree with Dr. King and the person he took that quote from, and President Obama, who took that quote from King, et cetera. But the arc doesn't bend by itself. We have to bend that arc. That's right.
That arc.
But
Yes.
we can. We can. And it's a good reminder of how bad things were when King was fighting and working. And of course, we're not done with that struggle either.
No, we're not. We're not. Well, Evan, thank you so very much for taking the time tonight. Thank you for the change that you brought about, and thank you for the change that you're still bringing about. Stand up and keep fighting.
Exactly.
Thank you.
All of us. Thank you. Thanks for the time. Go do something. Don't do nothing.
Yay.